Hi, my name's Stephen Richards, and what I'm going to be doing today is hopefully providing a bit of an overall explanation of what ChatGPT and other AI tools are, as well as giving you a quick and relatively dirty explanation of some tasks that you can do, ranging from pretty much everything from feedback to planning to even giving some marking criteria, creating rubrics, that kind of thing, and just to help you see how much time you can potentially save with tools like ChatGPT. So what is ChatGPT exactly? So essentially it is a large language model developed by OpenAI that uses advanced natural language processing techniques to generate human-like responses to text-based inputs. Essentially, the way that it works is that you ask it a question in the form of a conversation, and it will then search for information that it has been trained on that matches with what you're asking for. It will then try and interpret that information and display it to you in the form that you've asked, whether it's a essay, whether it's criteria, whether it's exemplars, whether it's whatever, and we'll try and produce that in the most human-like response. So what are exactly the pros of using AI, such as ChatGPT and Quillbot? So it does allow students to improve their writing skills. So they can help them by offering suggestions and corrections for grammar, punctuation, word choice. This sort of thing can help them become better writers and communicators by giving them more examples. Probably one of the most important for teachers is that it can allow them to save a huge amount of time by automating tasks such as planning, creating worksheets, generating quizzes, providing feedback, exemplars, all that sort of stuff. This can free up time for teachers to focus on the most important aspect of teaching, which is the personal interaction with the students. It can allow you to have more personalized learning. As you set up experiences for each student, you can customize them very quickly on the fly. So if you have students who are either struggling or who are potentially smashing it, you can very quickly ask for suggestions if you can't think of them in order to either scaffold at a lower level or potentially extend at a higher level. And even you could do that yourself, or you could actually allow the student and ask them for specific examples on how to extend themselves. And also accessibility. This sort of thing does allow education to become more accessible by offering support for students potentially with disabilities or those who are learning a new language. This can help to create an inclusive learning environment that accommodates students from diverse backgrounds and with different learning needs. Also does help those teachers who are potentially starting on a new topic who may not have a full breadth of knowledge. Rather than missing out on certain things they're not aware of, they can ask ChatGPT for help in order to plan, and that can then go into their working, into their planning, and then into their teaching at the end. Now, I wouldn't be silly enough to think that with new technology that students are going to use it completely positively. So there definitely are some cons for using these sorts of AI. The first one, and probably the most important, is the potential for cheating, which is either relying on ChatGPT to create whole assessments or for Quillbot to paraphrase, otherwise plagiarize content. We do also have a lack of personal interaction, so potentially that AI lacks the personal touch of human interaction, which can be critical for creating a supportive learning environment. We wouldn't want students to miss out on the social and emotional benefits of interacting with a teacher and peers in person. It can provide limited learning opportunities compared to in-person teaching. Students may miss out on the hands-on learning experience, a bit like with the personal interaction, and not be able to have those collaborative learning opportunities that are essential. We wouldn't want our students to be dependent on technology, so this over-reliance on technology can lead to a lack of critical thinking and problem-solving skills. They might become overly dependent on tools such as ChatGPT, Quillbot, Grammarly, that kind of thing, which can limit their ability to think critically and solve problems. And there are some ethical concerns, a little bit less with ChatGPT, more so with Quillbot, but also when we're looking at generated art, which does sometimes generate art based on work that hasn't been correctly sourced. So look, there definitely is some cons. So one of the things as teachers that we need to be aware of is that ChatGPT is very, very easy to use in order to cheat. It'd be silly to try and basically pretend otherwise. But what we hope to do is modify our assessments and potentially instill a sense of wanting to use it for the benefit rather than negative. But to show you exactly how easy it is, on the screen here I've got some screenshots of a very simple question, not particularly well written, but similar to what I was working on in my class, basically just asking it to write a short answer response. Now, to give you an idea of how quickly, because as you can see, it's about 800 words here, so a fairly decent short answer response, bordering on almost an essay with a little bit more added. If we look across, so we go into our chat GPT here, so this is essentially what you see. If you look up here, you've got your chat history down here, you've got your conversation, and I'm using ChatGPT 3.5. So in this search little conversation window down here, I can paste in my prompt, which is, can you write me an 800-word essay response to the question, what narrative conventions have been used in the short story White Fantasy Black Fact to show the value of empathy? Please follow proper academic essay structure and include 3 body paragraphs. So not a particularly detailed prompt, but it tells you what you're wanting it to do, which is the essay response, about 800 words, and the question, the narrative responses, and what the context is. So all we have to do is press enter, and you can see how quickly that this will actually produce some work. And really, this is in quick time. I haven't skipped anything without me going into super deep detail about how good the actual essay ends up being. You can see here that we have our intro, we've got our first narrative convention, our second narrative convention, the third, and a conclusion. If we look through here just quickly, we can see we've got an intro sentence, we've got an example, and we've actually got some analysis in here, so talking about discrimination and all that sort of stuff. And as we go through, you can see it's a pretty decent example. Now, what I can do if I want to refine this, so up here I've just said what narrative conventions have been used in the short story to show the value of empathy. If I wanted to pick a different value, so instead of empathy, I wanted to do to discuss more discrimination based on people's looks, I could instead say, can you please, and I tend to talk nicely to it because when robot overlords eventually do take over, I want to be on their good side. Can you please change the topic of the essay to instead focus on the theme of racism and more specifically, and my typing is terrible, the typing. And we put that in. And as you can see, it has changed it. So it gives you a little talk. It says, certainly, here is a revised essay. Short story explores the theme of racism stereotyping through various narrative conventions. And it has changed everything. And that is all of about 10 seconds of work. So it is not difficult for students to do this. Any halfway technically literate student will have found out about this, and whether it's blocked at school or not, they will do it at home. So this is what you need to be aware of, the capability of what it can actually produce. So one of the other tools that you'll definitely need to be aware of, and there are 100 of these, all doing essentially the same thing, but this seems to be one that a lot of children that I've seen have been using, is a service called Quillbot. Now this is essentially started off where it was a service where you could put a piece of text in. It would fix up your spelling, punctuation, grammar, offer you suggestions, change things here or there so that you could make your language more formal or more casual, yeah, that sort of thing. It has since started to be used by students because, as you can see across here, what you need to do is just put your bit of text in here and then you click rephrase and it will change it. And so you can see all the underlined, all the orange, all these blue things here. All of that is just this text here that's been changed. So this makes it exceptionally easy to actually plagiarize work. To give you an example of how it works, so this is what your Quillbot looks like. You've got a number of different services across the side here. You've got your text box, and when you put more in, you can see a paraphrase. So if we're going to be paraphrasing and plagiarizing some work, we might as well do it straight from Wikipedia. So if we're going to take this bit here, I'm going to copy and put it into here. Now, because we haven't got premium, we only got a certain amount of words. It doesn't matter. So we basically pulled this straight from the plagiarism wiki page. Put it in here, click paraphrase, And if you look across now, it's changing everything. So it's changing the orange, changing the blue. So this now, although it is essentially a plagiarized bit of text, it is completely different. And a lot of the plagiarism tools, while they are being developed to try and use synonyms to figure out what has been paraphrased, this is very difficult to get caught, especially when kids just paraphrase and paraphrase and paraphrase, and they do it 3 or 4 times. And as you can see, this bit of text here is now quite significantly different than this. And I can tell you, I have sat in a class watching students' laptops, and they have done this. They have just copied a text, chucked it in here, paraphrased it 3 or 4 times, copied this out, and put this into a Word document. So this is definitely happening. This is a bit more, I would say, devious. ChatGPT, at least you put in a prompt, you can try and rephrase it, you can try and refine it. This is just basically straight up plagiarism. You may be asking yourself, are there any tools that allow us to see what has been written by AI? And to be honest, there are quite a few that purport to be able to, but I don't really put too much stock in that. To give you an idea of what they attempt to do, what they look like. So this one is the AI text classifier. This one is actually developed by OpenAI, so the guys that made ChatGPT. What I've actually done is chucked the US Declaration of Independence in here. Now, what it will then do is say whether or not it thinks it is. So this one, it's correct that the Declaration of Independence was not actually generated by AI, but one of the other ones that always shows up when you're searching for it is 0GPT. Now, as you can see here, there is a bit of an issue. The exact same document, just the transcript of the Declaration of Independence, and it thinks that it was written 30% by AI or GPT. So you can see here what it highlights, it thinks is written by AI. And considering this was written a couple of 100 years ago, this is not correct. If you're looking at trying to detect this sort of stuff, these tools are somewhat useful if you use a few of them, but you can see I put the same thing in twice and I got completely different responses. I wouldn't necessarily put too much stock in the response. You may use it and it may be correct, and if you have a conversation with your student and say, hey look, this is what's showing up, let's have a frank conversation, that might prompt something, but I wouldn't necessarily be giving students reduced marks just based on what these programs say. So rather than relying on these sorts of tools, what I think is basically a more justified, valuable way of looking at text that could potentially have been AI generated is, one, just being a bit of an aware teacher. So having a look at their drafts, having a look at the end product, if the terminology, their language, their sentence structure, the language features that they have used, they're suddenly going from a 2 to a 10, you can have a good idea that potentially AI written. If they don't provide a draft at all, that could be a problem. You might specify in your assessment criteria that a draft is required so that you can see the difference. There is the possibility where students generate a whole task, then go and write it up. But at that point, they've basically done more work. I mean, that is something you can be aware of. Potentially, you can mark off in timeline how much of the draft is being done. So they just go home in one night, write a whole draft. But one thing that you can start to look out for is some visual clues. So if you have a look at this one here, this was a boy that I caught out fairly red-handed. Now, you'll notice here, there's some clues straight away. So the first one here, just to give you an idea, when I searched for this, it actually came up with about from these two. And again, look, I understand these aren't super duper credible, but more the visual clues. So if you have a look here, it goes from being margins out here and out here to quite smaller. The language itself increases in complexity and difficulty quite a large amount. But the other thing that you can notice is if you look around here, you will see some great boxes. Now, when you copy straight from here, you can't necessarily see it. And I do have my GPT on dark mode, but if you have a look here and you copy this, when you bring it into a document, if you just change the background color, fix the font up, make it all black and so it looks the same, this box is actually around the edge still. Now, some students don't know how to get rid of it. It is quite simple, but this here is actually a big clue. Now, I asked this student, I confronted him and said, hey, look, I've looked at your draft, I've looked at your good copy. They're actually quite different. These are showing up as being generated by AI. What's the go? And he actually admitted that, yes, it was. All of this and this was all AI generated. And so rather than relying on just, hey, this website shows this, I could have a look. That's going to be the way that really you combat this sort of things, is just saying, hey, your draft, you could copy it similar, or what you can do is say, okay, well, this looks like it's AI generated. So what I'm going to get you to do is pick 4 or 5 words from here, use them in another sentence in a different context, so not about Pompeii, and write me a definition. If they have written this, they should know how to use the word. They should be able to put it in different context, different sentence, and give you a meaning. If they can't, that's a bit sus. So yeah, like I mentioned, the best way really of detecting this sort of stuff is just having the student use complex vocabulary in a different context, do a definition, do some sentences. You can very quickly see whether they understand the words or not. And if they can't use them again, like they've already used them once, okay, you can have a conversation with them about where the work has come from. And a draft is becoming more and more valuable. Like I mentioned, one of the ways I would be using a draft is by having the students do the drafting in school time and putting a signature next to where they have got up to. And so then when they come back the next day and continue on with their draft, they write after where your signature is, and then you can again sign at the end of that. So you can see that the work has been done in school, and you can see the timeline of how many days it's taken them, rather than going home and writing the whole thing out at once. This allows you to keep a bit of a track on it. Annoyingly, it does mean that they can't do certain things at home, but that is unfortunately a bit of now the world that we live in, where we're going to have to make some alterations to our practices. Okay, now we've got past the negative stuff, which we have to get past. Let's really start going into the main benefits of these things, and we can basically break down all of them into one of 3 things. So we're either saving time, assisting with feedback for students, or assisting with planning. Now, I do have a lot of information on here. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time reading it because you can, but just to give you a bit of an idea of what the AI can actually do, I'm going to run you through an example set of outlines and then some lessons, and then moving into some worksheets. All right, so what I'm going to do is essentially act as if I'm at the start of the year. I know the assessment task that I want the students to do, and I know we're talking about a novel study. I know which novel we're going to use. So we're going to talk about using the Hunger Games book and talking about some dystopian conventions and how the author has used them. So what we would do to start with is, because this essentially learns as you talk, you want to give it some context. So you can say, hello, my name is Stephen, and I work at Ellenbrook Secondary College in Western Australia. So what you're doing there is you're essentially giving some context. So when you say to the to ChatGPT, hey, can you help me write some lessons? It's going to know that you're based in WA. So you say, I would like, and to be honest, you don't have to write like this. You can just tell it what to do. But what you're doing is also setting up how it reacts. So if you are talking positively to it, I have found that sometimes it responds back with more light-hearted responses. If you're just asking it questions, aren't providing the context, and are expecting it to do a lot more work, it's having to kind of work harder in order to produce what you've asked for. If you give it more information, it will produce stuff easily. So I would like to create a unit of work lasting 5 weeks based on the Hunger Games books and having students be able to identify the dystopian conventions that the author has used. And you create a 5-week outline with 4 lessons per week based on the Western Australian curriculum at a Year 9 level. Assume students have no prior knowledge of Indian societies. Okay, so reasonably detailed prompt. I would like to create, like you, to create a unit of work lasting 5 weeks based on the Hunger Games books and having students to be able to identify the dystopian conventions that the author has used. Can you create a 5-week outline with 4 lessons per week based on the WA curriculum at a Year 9 level, assuming students have no prior knowledge of dystopian societies? So we can put that in. And as you can see, it is going through. Now, what you might find is that it stops here. Now, the reason that happens is because ChatGPT has a unit count or a character count that it can use. So I think it's about 2,000 characters, and because we've got spacings and line breaks and letters, we've got a lot of stuff in here. So if you notice it stop, it's not actually frozen, it's just reached how much it can produce. So all you have to do is say, please continue. And again, my spelling is rubbish. Please continue. And as you can see, we're getting through, and we are finished. So we start now. Again, this is super easy to tweak, but if we have a look here, unit overview. In this 5-week unit, students will be introduced to the concept of dystopian societies and explore the conventions used in the Hunger Games books. They'll read and analyse the books, focusing on development, all these sorts of things. And it gives you week 1, the introduction. What's a dystopian society? Character development, plots and themes. So we've got 4 lessons here. Go down week 2, week 3, week 4, week 5, all the way down here. So if you're planning a unit, you don't quite know how to do it or what you should cover, this gives you a pretty rock solid outline. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, but what do I actually do in this lesson? So week 1, lesson 1, what is a dystopian society? I have no idea. I don't know how to really introduce it to my class. I don't know examples. So what we can do here is actually ask it to write out a lesson plan. Can you please write a 55-minute lesson plan for the first week, first lesson? Please include interactive activities. So we scroll. Right. As you can see, it's pumping it out. Now, we can have a look at the start here, and we can see lesson plan. What is dystopian society? So from the first lesson, week 1, to introduce the concept of dystopian societies and have students brainstorm examples. So it tells you what resources you need. And again, you can change this. The introduction. So first 5 minutes, and it's broken down all these. Greet the students, introduce the objective, ask them if they've heard of dystopian societies before and what they think that means. Move into brainstorming, dystopian societies, more specifically, and we get through, and there is even homework. Now, you might say to yourself, okay, I don't have whiteboards. So, can you replace the whiteboard activity with another as my classroom? Let's not have whiteboards. So here we go. I've now said well, you don't have the whiteboard, so can you change it? So it said, okay, cool, here's a new activity. Same, 15 minutes. It's changed this one up here. And it has actually given you, if you notice up here, it has actually given you a website that is available. So not just that it's providing the plan, it's actually giving you some resources. Got it in here. Now, you might say to yourself, okay, ChatGPT, very clever, but I have a very low achieving class, potentially a foundation, and I need to modify this because it's going to be too hard. So again, all we have to do is have that conversation with GPT and say, this looks great and covers what I need, but my classroom is very low ability level and I think this may be too hard. Can you make the content and the activities easier, please? And there we go. So now it has talked about Jamboard and interactive stuff again, but it is going through and it's provided simpler activities. So we have gone from an overall unit up here into an individual lesson plan. We have revised it twice because we said we didn't have whiteboards, so it's changed it. Then we said it's going to be too hard, so we've changed it. So you might say, okay, well, I would like some concrete evidence about what the students are going to do. So can you modify the lesson to include a worksheet that covers what you have planned for, and then create a worksheet that I can copy and paste into Word. So here we go. So it's changing the lesson plan. It's told you it's going to need certain things. And here we go. Now, this one here is quite short, but we can see we've got some elements and we're going to have some picture books. And we're going to be identify them. We can then say, can you expand worksheet to include definitions? So there we go. So for those lower ability ones who might need a bit more prompting, we've got some answers. Let's say that you actually want your students to figure out the definitions. Can you remove definitions and instead add spaces for the students to add their own definition? Now, sometimes it is a little bit slow because it can't quite figure out what you're asking, and this is how you have to learn to deal with GPT. But here we go. Now, I think it's just had a little bit of a confused, but you can see we got all the way up to here, going from a outline through to a specific lesson, modifying the lesson because we don't have a specific resource, then modifying that modified lesson because we have a low ability class, and then we've started to provide some worksheets. So all of that in a matter of about 5 minutes, which, considering that sometimes we can spend hours on planning, I think that's pretty decent. So one of the things that I think teachers will find probably the most valuable about GPT is its ability to put together actual substantial relief lessons for when you are so sick you can't get to school. A lot of times I think potentially some teachers may come into school because when they're sick, because writing lesson plans can be quite a heinous experience. So when we have this tool that you can essentially ask to, put some lessons together, it really, I think, will allow a better quality of life for teachers when they're crook, because rather than spending hours and hours when you're so sick at home on your computer trying to find resources, try to put plans together, you can spend all of about 5 minutes, put a resource together, flick it off to your head of learning area, and you're done and dusted. To give you an idea of how simple it is to create a meaningful lesson with ChatGPT for a relief, what we need to do is basically just have a look at, think about what we're covering, what we want the students to achieve, knowing that sometimes some of the lessons we provide relief teachers are basically just glorified word searches, because sometimes we can't find the resources we need because we're sick. We don't know their technical level. We don't know if they're going to be able to get onto laptops or projectors. We don't know a lot of things. We don't know if worksheets that we get are going to be printed off or photocopied in time. There's a lot of variables we need to deal with. One of the benefits about ChatGPT is that you can actually write lessons specifically for no technology, no photocopying, nothing. So, to give you an idea, what I have done is I'm going to bring up my relief template. 1 second. Okay, so this is what our relief lesson template looks like. A little bit of information. Some schools are different. Some might have a lot more information. Some might have less. But this is generally what we work with. So this information up here and the further considerations, obviously that is going to be specific to whatever lesson, whatever period, whatever class, and who's in there. So we can't necessarily have ChatGPT write that for us. But what we need to focus on is the lesson plan and materials. So what we can do is go across to ChatGPT and ask it, I require a lesson for my Year 8 English class based in Western Australia. And click enter. And here we go. So without even having to worry about being specific, without worrying about what we're studying, worrying about novel, none of that, we have got an entire lesson, including materials, ready to go. So all we would then need to do is copy this one. Now this is probably going to look a little bit awful, but actually, no, not so bad. Just a few spaces here and there that probably can fix up. And as you can see, in all of literally 30 seconds, longer than it takes me to actually tell you what's going on, we have a lesson plan. So we've got learning objective, got lesson procedures, demonstration, guided practice, independent practice, conclusion. Now, you may be part of a school that follows a different procedure, like EDI or whatever it is. You can modify it. You can say the classroom is quite badly behaved and cannot handle independent work. Can you please make it all structured group work? And here we go. So it's changed that, so now we can kind of be aware of our students. We know what we're going to have, and we've now got a class. So we've got a lesson that's more suited to our class. Again, if we want to talk about differentiation, can you provide an alternate lesson for a class with very low ability level? And again, still Year 8. It's still going to be providing you with all those times, but this is now for a much lower ability class. You can see the words being used up here: bright, smooth, loud, spiky, a bit different than up here, whereas asking you these sorts of things. So we've got that. Now on the flip side, because you don't want to forget about our gifted and talented kids or our top kids, can you modify the original lesson plan to cater towards a group of academically gifted academically gifted students working at year 10 level. And I apologize for my writing there. So again, grade level 10, advanced descriptive writing techniques, same thing, same lesson plan, same objectives. So within, looking at the time, 3 minutes, we have got 3 lesson plans without giving it any really additional prompting. If I wanted to have this be more linked to my dystopian conventions, which is what I was talking about in the previous part of the video, say, can you modify the lesson plan to instead reference dystopian conventions and have the students write a short amount of work. So again, quite vague, but we go down to the bottom. Descriptive writing, dystopian fiction, same thing. Materials, all of that. So all it would take is to copy this into our relief like we have here. Our materials, same thing, copy that. Up here, sorry, up here. Thanks for that formatting, and we've got all our materials as well. So rather than spending half an hour on Twinkle trying to find a lesson plan, this one here provided the material so we know what to prepare, provided our assessment, we've got differentiation between lower and higher, and we're good to go. Like, that's how easy it is to write relief. Will make everyone's life much easier. Now, let's say that we wanted to be a bit more specific. We wanted to pick a certain descriptor that we were working on, maybe from our unit outline, and we wanted to make sure that the lesson that we give is, a little bit more tailored. So if we were having a look through here, if we were to pick one out, so let's have a look at the modality. So we can pull this one out here, copy that into here. We could start a new one just to make it nice and clear. So can you write a relief lesson plan? And it's kind of where you can be a little bit more specific. So we're looking here at the year 7 syllabus. Go back here. Lesson plan for a year 7 Western Australian student based on the criteria of please assume no IT access or access to anything apart from paper and pens. Have the lesson last 50 minutes with a piece of work to be handed in at the end to show what has been done. So a bit more specific here. Can you write a relief lesson plan for a year 7 West Australian student, Australian class, based on the criteria of understand how modality is achieved. We've got it straight from the curriculum. Please assume no IT access or access to any part of paper pens. Have lesson last 50 minutes with piece of work handed at the end. Students have no prior understanding of modality. Now, they may understand what modality actually covers, but they may not necessarily specifically know what it is. So, again, what have we got? And you may find that sometimes, even though you've written the same question, it pumps out a format that looks a little bit different. It's just a basically consequence of how the actual language model works, where it's trying to find out and pull an answer as to what it thinks you're going to want. So, exact same thing. Lesson objectives, got our materials, begin by introducing the concept, ask you to the herd, again, because we mentioned that they have no real idea of what it is. It's checking for understanding. It has given some modal verbs. We've got all this. Now, again, you can see here it has mentioned worksheets. Is there a worksheet? No. Will there be? Absolutely. Can you produce the worksheet so that it can be copied and pasted into a Word document? And here we go. So we've got a lot of closed questions, it's given examples, and it's given you an answer key. I mean, if there is anything easier than that, I do not know. You'll copy that. If we're imagining this is our Word document, just get rid of all of this. And what you can do is paste without formatting. And there you go, instructions. We've got the sentences, and you might want to put that on a different page. That's how easy it is. Now, probably one of the contentious ways that ChatGPT may be used by teachers is to provide feedback. I personally think that it's absolutely fantastic, especially after you've had your 28,000 word essay and you're trying to make sure that whether it's a tense or a perspective or a value or something remains the same. ChatGPT doesn't get tired. Teachers get tired. So what you can do is you can actually put in criteria, and you can allow it to actually give you some feedback so that you can pass that through to the student, and you can actually have them improve things for the final result. You may be happy having ChatGPT provide criteria, and then you can then also essentially moderate with ChatGPT. You can see, okay, I can see what it's looking for, I can see the score that it's given, and do I necessarily agree? One of the great things is you can use the same prompt for every single piece of work that you use. So it's asking the same questions, looking for the same thing, and providing the same scores. So you've got some consistency there. This definitely helps if you're not 100% confident, you want a second opinion. You might not be able to get into have any physical moderation, but this allows you to get that feedback. So this one is a little bit more difficult. So what we have here is a mock assessment. We're ready for some feedback, and this is the task here. So it was a vignette based on the book, chapter from the book The Straight Bat by Roger Holt. So what we basically have to do is tell the ChatGPT what we're looking for feedback. So obviously we're going to be using the marking key. So all we do is take the whole thing and copy it, go across to ChatGPT, open up a new chat, and go, can you save the following criteria from a Year 12 Western Australians assessment so that you can provide feedback on submission afterwards. So we give them that content, we say that's criteria from an assessment, Year 12 Western Australia, it knows where it's looking, and I'm saying I'm going to provide some feedback later on. So colon, and all we're doing is just copying and pasting, a bit difficult to see, comes out a bit wonky because it's not a table, but essentially we put that in. So we just go down here and we double check. So yes, I've saved that criteria. Please note that it will not be able to provide feedback on specific submissions as I'm an AI language model and don't have access to individual student work. So what you can then do is go back over here, copy and paste this. So based on the saved criteria, can you please give feedback following submission? Copy and paste it, chuck it in. Now, this is where you may have a bit of difficulty because depending on how it decides to spit out the feedback, it sometimes can be a bit difficult to read. But if we look here, we've put the criteria in, we've put the submission in, and we've got a mark that you can use to give feedback to your students. So with structure, the structure of the piece conforms to the conventions of a vignette with a detailed discussion of key events and reflection on the characters' thoughts and feelings. The events are described in a clear and engaging way, with the attitudes and values of the characters being demonstrated effectively. Overall, give the section a 9 out of 10. Same with crafting techniques, same with using information, and language control. Overall, I'll give this submission a score of 22 out of 25. This piece effectively conveys the emotions and thoughts of the character with engaging language and clear structure. However, there are some areas where more use of contextual information and language control could be improved. So, if you just wanted to give this back, you could then copy and paste it, but what we can do is follow the logical steps. So, in here in the feedback, it hasn't really given a clear idea of what the student might need to do. So, we can ask it, can you be specific with what the student to improve? And here we go. So that has given specific targeted information for that student, for that specific example. And one of the beauties of this language model is that it does know English quite well. It knows the different styles. So it's able to give that specific information. So if we had a student who was to paste this criteria in, put their assessment in, it would give them an overall score, and to be honest, 22 out of 25 is pretty smashing. Then, if he really wanted to get that top scores, it gives exact things about what it believes. Now, as a teacher, you would want to be diligent and do your own, like I said, due diligence. You would want to maybe have a look. Do we think all this is correct? I have found sometimes ChatGPT can be maybe sometimes a bit lenient, sometimes a bit harsh, but it's a really great tool to use because what you can do is grab student number 2, student number 3, student number 4, and put them in, and it will give you, so even if it's being a bit more lenient, it will at least give you a view of all the assessments with the same view, giving you the same level of assessment. So one of the things that may be the most contentious based on how confident people are with AI is actually leveraging it to give feedback to students. So whether or not they get feedback at home or they submit it to you and you actually use ChatGPT as a tool to help you pull out what's information's in the assessment and then actually provide the feedback. I know for myself, I am not good at writing the feedback without it coming off as overly critical, or either that or the complete opposite where I'm basically just providing positives and not actually providing anything for them to work on. So I've used ChatGPT as a bit of a middle ground. So what you can do is basically use it and put in the criteria, put in the assessment, and it will have a look at it for you and give you some feedback. So if we go out of here, so what we have here is a blank marking key for an assessment, just a mock one. There's some room for written feedback, and down here we've just got a vignette. Now there's all the formatting's been removed. It's just a blank, basically a normal document. So what we need to do is go up because we want to give ChatGPT something to give feedback on. So all we do is we copy all the contents of the table, go across in ChatGPT. Now you can use the same the same conversations, but just for making it easy for you to read, we're using a different one. So what we're going to do is tell it what we need to do. So can you save following criteria from a West Australian Year 12 classes assessment so that I can later on provide you with some submissions. Colon, and with it in there, and it'd be hard to see because it's looking a bit wonky now. It's not a table, but essentially we've got that. We put it in. All right, so you can see here, sure, I've set the criteria for you. You can provide me with your submissions whenever you're ready. So we go back to our not so silly Billy student. We copy all this. We go back. Can you provide feedback on following mission? So a lot of the times you might find that it spits out feedback there's no numerical score, there's no percentage. Sometimes it doesn't follow the criteria. I haven't quite figured out how exactly to figure out the prompt that will give the correct answer. Sometimes you have to play around with it, but it's very easy to fix because if you were looking at different criteria, you just go, can please list feedback in the criteria descriptions you have saved. And here we go. So now it's a bit clearer. So we've got our structure, techniques, using information, language control, and it said that based on all of these, give a 21, 20 out of 25. So there is some, if you look in here, there is a bit of a suggestions for what they could improve. Now, what you can do specifically then is ask, can you give specific directions for improving? And here we go. So if you really are having those kids that are aiming to smash it, this has given you exact criteria on what they need to do. So to improve the score in the criteria for structure, you want to focus on providing deeper reflection. For techniques, you have used language features effectively, but to improve, you could consider using a wider range of techniques. So it tells you exactly what you need. So what you can then do is combine those. So can you combine those two responses and tailor language used to be instructive and appropriate for our student. So as you can see here, it's changed the language, whereas before it tended to be a bit impersonal, where it's got the writer and the writer. Once we've gone down here, it's changed it all. Overall, your submission shows good understanding. You've effectively used this, and it's provided all these things. Now, we haven't got a numerical score. We don't necessarily need it because it's feedback. We're not using it to actually grade. But we've got that friendly, constructive language. We've got the different four, given specific feedback, and it's actually given a bit of a well done pat on the back. So all we do, copy and paste this into here. And we can do that without formatting. Now, you may have students who want to know where they're going in terms of like the numerical score. So we'll do back here. So can you include numerical score in that feedback? The rest is correct. So you can see here, put them in there. It's a little wonky with it being jammed in the middle. And you said put the feedback at the start. The different functions. And there we go. So now we could take that, bring it across here, get rid of that, paste with that formatting, and we've got feedback. So for structure, good things, bad things, good things, more things, good things, bad things, good things, bad things, numerical score. And then if you wanted to, you could put it in here. You can also ask it, can you give a total in both numerical and percentage? And again, it's just tweaking it, but now it's added this. So you can kind of figure out You might have students that just want the written feedback. You might have students who want to know what score they're getting. It's up to you. You might have a kid who's smashing it. You might necessarily want to tell them they're getting almost the top scores. So then they might not do anything here. They might go, well, I'm already getting 5. Why would I, why would I change, why would I do more work? So if you just had, if you got rid of that, then they have a little bit more motivation to get that. But you can see how easy this is. So then all you have to do is get, rather than not so silly Billy, you get the second student, the third student, the fourth student, the fifth student, put it in here. And because we've already saved the criteria, all you would need to do is have, right, can you now give, can't spell, on this next mission. And then you would copy and paste the next one in. So very powerful. Whether you are doing it or whether the students do it, they get very specific feedback. One of what I believe is the most powerful things that it can also do in terms of saving time is actually creating examples. So what you can do is you can ask for it to do certain things at certain levels. You can say, can you create a text and make it have certain features? So lots of punctuation, not enough punctuation, too much descriptive language, not enough, all that sort of stuff. So one of the examples that I had was that one of the assessments was to write a story from a different point of view. And what I was able to do is just ask ChatGPT to rewrite a story completely. Would have taken me potentially a few hours to write, but it was able to do that quickly. And so I was able to just then get onto the planning and actually doing the assessment. Now, I'm going to use White Fantasy Black Back by Jack Davis as an example here. So, this is the normal story. It's basically about a Indigenous family that is walking along the road near Guildford back in the 70s, and a bus driver turns them down. They don't allow them to get on. A young girl gets bitten by a snake, and a group of bikies turn up, and the family is at the start quite cautious, thinking that bikies are going to be bad, but they turned out to be actually lovely, and there's a bit of a juxtaposition there of the white bus driver and the bikies and who you think is going to be the good guys. So what we've got here is a story. Now, this is told from the perspective mostly of the bus driver, and then it turns to the family. And by the end, where we get to the bikies, I apologize, I've got this in large font, so it's easier for a student to read, but it doesn't really move on to the bikies from their perspective. It stays with the family. So what we can do is we can actually change the perspective completely. So can you change the point of view of the story of and we just put some questions at the end here. Those. So we have copied it in there. Can you write story from the point of view of the bikies from the very beginning? You may need to make up some story to make it all make sense. So normally we would have to figure out what's not in the story. We'd have to figure out how we're going to write it. We would have to draft it, because we don't want to give kids anything with spelling errors because they make fun of you. We don't want that. So we've got the story in here. We've told it what to do. So let's just see how it reacts to this. And here we go. So it has taken the story and it has changed the point of view. Now, it hasn't come up with stories before when they were introduced in the original one, but you see we were a group of 30 writers, and we got all of that. We slowed down, towering redhead. So it has gone through and changed the point of view completely. Right? Now, we can potentially ask it to do some more things. Describe bikies, actions after they leave the town in approximately 500 words. So as you can see here, you have asked it a question, it's looked, it's gone, okay, well, what would happen? Now this is pulling it out of complete nowhere, right? This story does not exist, right? But it is able to look at stories, it's able to draw conclusions on what happens with bikies, and actually write it down. So if your activity is to continue the story, you've got exemplars. If your activity is to change point of view, you've got that completely, right? You could ask it about the bus driver at the start who drives off leaving the family behind. Describe the actions of the bus driver after he leaves family behind in approximately 500 words. Actually, let's just do less, because that much, 250 words. Please discuss his emotions. So again, we got all this. We've got a story that doesn't exist, different point of view, making up a story. This is so powerful, such a time saver. Because what you can also do is, can you take that last example and have multiple spelling and punctuation errors for students to find. Then provide the answers below. Now, it hasn't quite understood what I've said, but you can kind of see how it got there. So, can you use the text about bus driver to in inserting numbers. And it is giving a whole stack, and it's reached that point where it's done 1,000 odd characters, so it's not going to go any further. But we could go through here and we could find the punctuation errors, and we could see what we need to fix, and we could ask it, can you provide the answers, please? And there we go. So there wasn't too many, it's found them. So whether you're looking at changing point of view, whether you're looking at introducing story before or after, whether you're looking at introducing punctuation errors, whatever it is, all of these things are done for you in 30 seconds. The biggest pain for this is finding out where some of these texts are actually kept in a form that you can easily copy and paste them. Sometimes in PDF they're a bit wonky, but the amount of time that's going to save you is pretty massive. All right. Continuing on with our time-saving activities, what we're looking at is creating some review questions. So a lot of times if you're introducing a new text or a new movie or a new topic that may not have been covered before, or maybe not covered too well, and you want to have some review questions so that you can kind of make sure everyone's following along, keeping up, you might want to have review questions for individual chapters. ChatGPT is able to do this. So if we have a look in here, open up a new chat. If we were to pick a book, so we were talking about Hunger Games earlier, can you write chapter review questions for the first, we'll just do 5 because we know that if we start having more than 1,000 characters, it's going to pause itself. You can continue on and do all of them, but just to show you what happens, can you provide chapter review questions for the first 5 chapters of the first Hunger Games book. Please use a combination of questioning levels from good old Bloom's. Oops, Bloom's taxonomy. So not only are we just making questions, it's going to be different levels. And here we go. So first 5 chapters, it's told you what level of Bloom's. So we've got knowledge, comprehension, all the way to evaluation. Now you might say, well, 3 is not really enough. Can you make it 6 questions per chapter, please? So here we go. So it's going through Bloom's, starting from knowledge, moving up to evaluation and synthesis. There's the first 5 chapters. Now, you may be reading a book that you're not 100% sure of. You may not have read it before, or you might want to provide chapter summaries to students who may have some learning difficulties, who may not be able to get to school, may fall behind. So rather than having them just miss out reading whole chapters, you might say, well, it would be really useful for you to have chapter summaries. So can you provide chapter summaries of approximately 100 words? Because we want to keep it short again. You can do this multiple times and have much larger chapter summaries. Words for these first 5 chapters. And here we go. So about 100 words. And it goes through and it will give you all the chapters. Now, one thing I have noticed with this is sometimes its training data includes books that might have more chapters. It might be different releases in different countries. So you do have to pay a little bit of attention. I know that some books that I have asked to do reviews on ended up having 2 or 3 more chapters than actually exist in there, which is a bit weird, but again, AI is in the beginnings. But with a book as popular as this, we can go through. So we have chapter summaries. So if we have a student who misses, you might want to say, okay, well, we're going to read 3 chapters per lesson. You've missed out on 1 lesson. Here's the first 3. I could keep going 6 through to, excuse me, however many chapters there are. And there you go. So you have provided equity for those students who can't be there. If you wanted to put this up on Connect, you're not having any plagiarism concerns by putting PDFs up. Still allows students to read, doesn't give them all the detail. You can absolutely ask for more. You could say chapter summaries of 400 or 500 words. You probably have to do them one at a time, but you can see how good this is for providing it. And the training data does seem to be pretty widespread. I have tried putting in a couple of random books and it has a pretty good idea of them. You could ask it for questions about what's going to happen next. What do they predict? Those sort of questions, and it will pick all of them up. So it's a really great tool. Also allows you, if you have students with dyslexia and you want to have chapter summaries in more dyslexia friendly fonts, very easy to do. So this is probably the other contentious way that GPT could be used, is actually to create assessments. I personally don't think it is, but you would have to be paying quite close attention to the questions it's using just to make sure that it's using the same references you are, it's not using a different book, it's not using the wrong sort of language. But especially for low stakes assessments, meaning that you maybe have more formative assessments during your lesson planning. Again, if it's only taking you 20 or 30 seconds to create one, it's not that difficult. You can have more of these through so that if you have students who miss certain things, we want to have more portfolio activities. This is how you can use it. So if we close this, we go back to our Hunger Games, right? So we're going to keep using Hunger Games. We talked about dystopian conventions. So show it up in your chat again, just to keep it clear. So what we want to do is basically check on the student's understanding, and we'll go with dystopian conventions. So just to give you an idea of the sort of stuff that ChatGPT does know, you can ask it things like, what other dystopian conventions of a or I should say the conventions of a dystopia. So as you can see, it's giving you an ad. So sometimes you might just use this as like essentially a Google. But we can see here, oppressive government, control of information, social stratification, environmental degradation, loss of individuality, and resistance and rebellion. So that is reasonably high level language. So we might say, can you reword or year rate? Now, that is probably a little bit too simple. So let's just go ignore that rewording, please. Now, it does try to answer your question, so it does want to know why. That's fine. You say it was too simple. And that's much better. So we've simplified it down from our 6 up here, which is correct, might be a high level. We tried rewording it. It was a bit low level. You might have a low level class though, so this might work for you. We've said, look, not quite what I was looking for. And it has given you another example. So what we can do here is we can actually ask it, can you create an assessment that will allow Year 8 students to demonstrate their understanding of the conventions of a dystopia. So here we go. So now what we're doing is asking them to create a dystopian society. Instructions. Imagine you are a writer who's been tasked with creating a dystopian society for a novel or film. Using what you've learned about the conventions, create a society that's oppressive, environmentally damaged, and has a stark divide between the wealthy and the poor. In your society, individuality is discouraged and conformity is encouraged. Additionally, the government is totalitarian, and the information is controlled to main tower. In your response, include the following information. So it's given you exact things here. And it has given you some weighting. Now, one of the things that as a relatively new teacher that I struggle with is actually writing marking criteria, because the difference in certain things can be quite, it's just some wording sometimes, and it's a bit of a struggle. Now, looking down this, I realize that it's actually why isn't it finding it? So what we would do is have a look. And let's have a look here. So, one second. So what we've done is we've had a look at the criteria. Now, it's not a specific dystopian one, but what we have is explore and reflect on personal understanding of the world and significant human experience gained from interpreting various representations of life matters in text. So looking at that. So what we can say is, can you create a rubric in a table that covers a number of criteria, gives 5 levels of achievement with numerical scores and covers that's a bit weird. Now, what we can also get ChatGPT to do is create rubrics. I know that I'm still working on developing them myself, figuring out the different verbs and what's to be covered, but ChatGPT is quite good at doing it. Can be a little bit vague sometimes, but if it gives you 90% that last 10% you can change, save yourself a stack of time. So what I've done is I've just put my entire prompt here. Just makes it a bit easier to see before I get into GPT. So if you see here, you see what we're asking it. So can you create a rubric in a table based on the following criteria from the WA curriculum? Use this comprehension strategy to interpret and analyze text, comparing and evaluating representations of an event, issue, situation, or character in different texts. So, context from the curriculum. We then said the task is for the students to rewrite the telltale heart in a different perspective, such as the neighbour or the old man. The rubric should have 6 sections and is given a numerical score of either 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, or 10. These are the things that I would like. These ones are always going to be fairly consistent across all of our assessments. And then we've got text structure, language control, narrative point of view, and language control. Now, you might be looking at different things. You might have less. The way we do our assessments is 10 points per for 60. Just makes our assessment at the end with our histograms and our differentiation, all that sort of stuff, a bit easier. So that's what we're going to use. So we jump into GPT, put it in here, so you can see why I had it in the Word document, a bit easy to see. It's the exact same thing. And then all we need to do is press enter. Now, this is done. It's actually that easy. Now, you may decide that you're drafting and editing. You might want to have mention about multiple ways of drafting. So, can you replace drafting tables with more specific about getting multiple edits as well as using information in the edits to remove information, use more complex language. So let's have a look at what that prompts out. And there we go. So we've gone from a somewhat vague, limited, some, appropriate, skillful, highly skillful, through to some drafting editing but without any improvements, several rounds of drafting, multiple rounds of drafting with significant improvements, extensive rounds. So again, we could change that. So if we wanted to talk about our language control, so that is great. And you also place the language information about sentence structure, grammar, etc. So see how that goes. And there we go. So we could then copy that into our Word document. We have our, and this is 2 different tasks because the rubric here was a bit weird, but we've got convention. So we asked it what it was talking about. We asked it to reword it. We gave a assessment task, and then ignoring this rubric, if we move on to this one, we gave it specific criteria, told it how to set it up, and it created a rubric for us. Again, that took maybe 5 minutes. You might want to change this. You might have some standards with your school about the drafting and portfolio activities. It's up to you, but again, that's the whole process: assessment, description, criteria, whole rubric, everything done and dusted in 5 minutes. Now, with this one, I have gone over it a bit when we were doing the chapter, the review questions, but you can summarize content with ChatGPT. So whether that's whole stories, whether that is we're talking about actual unit outlines itself, whether we're talking about content that was covered, there's a lot of things that you can summarize. And ChatGPT is able to do that quickly, clearly, efficiently, and very easily modified, where if you find that the summary that's pumped out is aimed at too high or too low, rather than having to rewrite it yourself, you can just ask it, hey, can you please make that a bit more high, at some high level concepts, or can you just lower it down? Again, saving heaps of time. If you want to have content on Connect, especially if you end up doing more working from home or teaching from home, this sort of stuff, you can have content up on Connect. It takes 5 minutes rather than a few hours, giving you more and more and more time to spend with the students.